My name is Jason.
My name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, we take a light-handed approach to Legerdemain.
Our first segment is a basic crawl. Legerdemain is a module for advanced Dungeons & Dragons written for 3 to 5 player characters, each between levels 4 to 7. Its author is the impressively named Matthew Michael Patrick Schutt and features artwork by Paul Jacques. It was originally published in Dungeon Magazine number 39 back in 1992. The module is set in a theater and bears the tagline, "It's opening night, break a leg," which is not only cliché, but also there is probably no danger of anyone breaking their leg, meaning the tagline doesn't even work as a joke. The module begins with the party's services being requested by the owner of the theater Legerdemain, a Mr. Curran Erntor, in a monologue that you read to the players that is 7 full paragraphs long. Mr. Erntor explains that he has overheard the director of the current production, Prim Glamour, talking in his sleep about how he wants to harm the theater's principal patron, a wizard named Skiltor Rune. He wants the party to investigate. Next, we are given some description of the activity taking place in the theater when the party arrives to begin its investigation. This is followed by roughly 3 pages, triple column width, of NPC descriptions. The important NPCs are Toril Harlaninen, a gnome dressed as an imp, which is an important detail, so put a pin in that. The aforementioned Prim Glamour, a character I can only describe as depicted with no small dose of homophobia. Trivety Erntor, daughter of the owner, a character I can only describe as depicted with no small dose of sexism. And Thespor Murmastan, a famous actor. Next comes 5 pages of keyed entries describing the theater itself. This begins with the grid, which is the network of ropes and pulleys above the stage, as well as some special rules for characters navigating it. Then we have the keyed entries, of which there are 54, none of which contain treasures, monsters, clues, or really anything else the party will care about.
And next we have a section called Legwork. And now that I think of it, not break a legwork, another missed opportunity. Here we are told...
such a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Here we are told some key pieces of information the characters can learn while they're talking to people around the theatre. The play is a medieval fantasy piece, and Prim is making all kinds of weird changes to it. Thespor Murmastan, the big actor, has gone insane. Tivity, the daughter of the owner, is in love with Thespor. Small, unexplained accidents have been occurring. And the night of the first performance is also the night of some lunar holy day, which is part of a misdirection thing that's meant to make the players believe that everything going on is part of some occult ritual, which would probably have been more interesting had it been relevant. It isn't, but never mind. Anyway, importantly, during the legwork phase, no matter what they do, the party will never be successful when trying to question Prim Glamour. Then comes an incident where someone on the grid, that's the gantry section above the theatre, nearly has a fall and is just hanging for a bit, which is, someone actually falling and dying would be interesting, so that doesn't happen. This poor grid worker... this poor grid worker explains that some kind of imp pushed him. And of course, the party earlier met the fabulously vaguely Finnish-named gnome earlier, who was dressed as an imp, but plot twist, it's actually an imp who we'll meet later. Next, we're told what will happen if the party spies on Prim Glamour at night time. We're also given this fantastic piece of guidance. With the party skulking around at night, a confrontation with Prim Glamour is inevitable. And indeed, if you don't have this inevitable confrontation with Prim, where he tries to blast you with illusions for a minute but then stops, you can't learn what's really going on, which is... Prim isn't the murderer. It's Skiltor Rune, the wizard. Prim has been muttering about Skiltor in his sleep because Skiltor has his talisman that helps him sleep peacefully at night. So Skiltor, that name, will give the talisman back if Prim helps him with his plan to assassinate Tivity, who has rebuffed the mage's romantic advances.
Which I'm pretty sure makes Skiltor an incel, but, you know.
Yeah, well, maybe we're underselling this scenario as, in fact, a brilliantly prescient satire on something or other. Anyway, so there's another plot twist, which is that we later learn that the talisman that has been mentioned is not a kind of medallion or anything like that, but rather his cat named Talisman. And that's roughly the excitement level of everything in this scenario.
About as exciting as it gets, yeah.
So then there's a description of the Goon Squad, which is a collection of scoundrels working for Skiltor, including the actual imp mentioned earlier, a pair of crude halfling siblings, and quote-unquote Oriental hobgoblin, who I should also mention is described as a witch doctor. You know, just to throw in a couple of continents worth of, oh God, never mind. And then there are a few more. If the party manages to actually kill any of them, they will be resurrected by the wizard, so you can fight them again in the finale.
Then we get to the section called Opening Day, which is just more of what was happening the day before, but just busier. Then comes a section called Double Trouble, where we learn that the actor Thespor isn't crazy, he's a clone. The real Thespor is tied up and hidden away. The clone is there to murder Tivity in the middle of the play. Yes, listeners, Tivity is to be murdered by the man she rejected Skiltor for, meaning we are getting the full red pill fantasy here, folks. Next is a section called The Curtain Comes Up, where some more scripted drama takes place. Then comes the final scene, where the module actually gets damn close to being interesting, as it's comprised of a more or less improvised battle between the Goon Squad, Skiltor, and the party throughout the theater. Then we have a little denouement to wrap things up. Yeah,
in which, it nearly kind of redeems itself by having Tivity reject the guy she's supposed to be in love with, but then blows it by having her in love with one of the PCs, which is just...
God, I rolled my eyes so hard.
Yeah. I mean, I went from, oh, that's pretty good, to one sentence later going, oh.
I had the exact same reaction. I was like, oh, this might actually, oh.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how we have used this module, what experience we have with it. Tom?
Mercifully, I've only read it.
I have run a Dungeon World series called Legerdemain, which was inspired by elements from the module.
What is wrong with you?
But I have not run it straight. I just took elements from the module. I did not run this particular story, so to speak. So let's try to do things we liked about the module. Tom?
Okay, so let's see. Right, for all its many faults, as you noted, the final fight sequence actually is potentially pretty good, I think. And that's because it follows a rule of kind of action scenes that works in movies and I think also works in role-playing games, which is where you quite carefully lay out the scene so that all the interesting features and all the spatial relationships between different parts of it. And it's quite complex and three-dimensional. The theatre, it's got, the grid, which is the lighting rig, and a basement, and of course all the different levels of balconies and seating, and the stage risers and the underworld underneath the stage. So it's quite an interesting place to explore. And like John Woo does this in his good films. So like if you think of the warehouse fight scene in Hard Boiled, or even of course the greatest Hollywood movie ever made, Face Off, all those fight sequences always start giving you a good look at what's about to be shot to pieces, so that you can follow the action and you don't get all that kind of confusing who's diving behind what wall kind of thing during a gunfight. And in role-playing games, of course, we tend to do that with just literally showing a map. But in the scenario, you've got a chance to actually go to all the different places, all those 54 keyed entries, which would probably be fine if it was just number 54, this is a storeroom for stuff. But it isn't. It goes on for at least a paragraph each time. And so you do get to spend a bit of time getting to know the layout so that when you finally have to have a fight in it, you could usefully make decisions about whether to climb up onto the lighting rigs or, dive off one thing onto another or what have you.
That somewhat dovetails with one of the things I liked about the module. Despite being utterly devoid of anything relevant to the mystery at hand, the keyed entries and the maps do combine to be a highly detailed description of how a theater is laid out. You can definitely take that material, fill in the locations with interesting things, and then run a fun little theater or opera house adventure like I did.
Yeah, I mean, the maps I thought were particularly, really reusable. Although curiously, I noticed that the scale is 1 square equals 5 foot, but there are no squares on the map.
I missed that bit, but I'm glad you caught it. Yeah. Anything else?
To continue with the straightforwardly good bits, I think there are some nice bits of business in here. A dangling stagehand, chasing someone's cat around during a fight sequence, which I think is maybe a bit much by the time it happens. They're okay little snippets. but they are really overwhelmed by the relentless march of things that have to happen. So you don't get much time to enjoy them, I don't think.
I thought the illustrations were nice. That's something I liked about the module. They're actually quite good. And the cover illustration of that issue of Dungeon references this module because, of course, Dungeon magazine always had like 6 or 7 different modules in it, right? And that cover illustration is also quite nice. Very, very, very inspiring. So that was pretty great. I also liked a few of the NPCs, particularly their names, but like not because they're well named, but just because like, I don't know, I had a laugh. Like the actor named Thespor. Yeah, the illusionist director named Prim Glamour. I mean, come on.
Prim Glamour is great. It just makes me think of Beanie Man's greatest hit every time I read it. Anyway.
Yeah, so that was about the extent of it for me. Nice illustrations. Some of the NPCs are kind of fun. And the theater map layout and all the descriptions, quite detailed descriptions of each of the 54 spaces were pretty handy. Was there anything else that you liked about it?
Well, talking about great illustrations, I think it's a great illustration of why the OSR exists. This is like the ne plus ultra of railroady trad, like 90s AD&D that is everything that the OSR reacts against, you know. So like you've got a few things that happened when we got to this point. Let's blame Dragonlance and Tracy Hickman for all of this. It is possible to have this kind of sequential set piece based adventure and for it to be a good time. But when it goes wrong, okay, old school dungeons could sometimes be a bunch of set pieces waiting to happen in different rooms, and that was a bit lame. And then this is just the opposite. It's things that have to happen. Even if you do X, doesn't matter. You have to reset it so that Y occurs instead. And it's just like, whether you go back to old school things in the sense of trying to recreate what happened before we got to this point, or if you do the kind of the old school Renaissance rather than revival approach of doing a kind of alternate history where you branch off before we got to this point and take old school games as your foundation document and diverge in a different way as if it hadn't happened. This is why. It's because you see this coming down the road and you just say no.
Yeah, so you like it because it's an interesting historical artifact for why we are where we are
basically
nowadays. Yeah. Well, that's actually a pretty good segue into the next segment, which is questions we had. I know you have a few.
Yeah. Number 1, Jason, why did you make me read this?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, Tom. I was actually going to talk about it as a particular moment in gaming history, right? You've already kind of covered it pretty adequately, so I'm not going to go into all that. But I will say, though, that I loved this when I was a kid. Like, I bought Dungeon Magazine when I was a kid, and this issue came out like right around when I was really, really heavy getting into D&D. And I loved it. I thought like, oh my gosh, it's like a little like, you know, mystery kind of comic adventure thing in a theater. Like, how cool is that? Right. To my young mind, this was like really awesome. Right. Like I really, really dug it. And so there was like a nostalgia factor for me when I chose to run it a while back. I, of course, read it in anticipation of running it and decided to make a bunch of changes to the module that when I realized that it did not hold up to my nostalgia. But yeah, basically that's kind of how I ended up on it. But I do think it actually does serve to illustrate this kind of really interesting point that you brought up earlier about like what the OSR was a reaction to.
Yeah. I mean, do you think does this still count as old school? Like, was it 92? What was the year again?
92, yeah.
92. I mean, I would say this has broken beyond the boundaries of OS, rather, I guess.
Yeah. It's definitely like sliding into what I think would become like the type of gaming that really kind of took off like in the mid to late 90s, right? That not only like brought forth the OSR, but also story games.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a couple of other questions that are really just complaints, so I'll just say them quickly. Why does it take so long to tell the GM what the actual plan is?
Oh my fucking God.
Yeah.
I'm like 10 pages in. I'm like, Jesus Christ, what is this about? Yeah. Tell me about it.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
I mean, you get through like 4 pages of theater spaces where literally nothing is in them except for just like little detailed descriptions of props and things. Like you just, the struggle is real on this one, folks.
Yeah. Well, that was the next question on my list. Is 54 keyed entries maybe a bit much? I mean,
it is a bit much. Yeah. I mean, I will say that it is fantastically detailed. You can't go wrong. It reminds me a little bit of that fort in Keep on the Borderlands, right? Like, it's fantastically detailed. You could grab this and populate it with something more interesting.
If the theatre director guy is an amazing illusionist magician, why is the monster in the finale scene of his play a puppet?
I don't know. I thought that I had that exact same thought. I'm so glad you brought that up because I had that exact same thought. I'm like, wait a minute. Why is there this big animatronic puppet thing? He's a fucking illusionist. We've already seen him do these like big monstrous illusions. And also his name is Glamour. Hello. Yeah. That really was pushing the boundaries of like my sort of like,
I mean, a lot of this really is some of that kind of real mundanification of magic that you get in AD&D stuff that I just hate. Like, they've got magical chandeliers, but they don't use magic for the big show thing. Like, what?
Well, it was just another reminder that like there are many opportunities for this module to be interesting, and they're all not taken, right? Like, the idea of there being a sort of moon harvest, moon festival related ritual connected to the goings on at the theater. Total misdirect. There's nothing that has no relevance to the story. That's one part of it. There, the guy who gets tangled up in the ropes, like when he gets pushed by the imp, he could fall and die, which would be, I think, more interesting because a murder is more interesting than just some dope hanging from ropes, right? Like, this module's just filled with stuff like that, right? It has this tentativeness that just bugs the shit out of me.
Yeah, and also I think I'm just reacting more broadly to it in a way, which is that it's the question section, so I'll do this as a question. Which one of these is worse, Jason? Is it the episode of the mainstream TV drama that you enjoy where they go to the theatre and have the theatre episode? Or is it the one where they go to Chinatown?
The Chinatown one.
That is the correct answer. That was a trick.
But I take your point.
But yeah, after the moment when watching, I don't know, Psych or something, where I realised, oh god, they're doing a Chinatown episode, that my second least favourite thing in like season 3 of any kind of light-hearted dramedy is the theatre episode, because and it's like this, it's cliches and like pretentious actors and directors who have a vision and
Let's go to the chain lightning round. You basically took all mine, Tom, so why don't you start? I'm
so sorry. Okay, I like the grid. The grid is good. All the gantries and supports and pulleys. It feels like a kind of theatre insider thing. And that's like a really nice atmospheric sublocation.
I'm quite fond of the author's little biography right at the beginning of the module, which is narrated in the first person. I'm going to read it for you now. I was born in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, a town that bored me even when I was an infant. My family moved around to several places in the U.S., including California and Louisiana. These experiences helped to shape me into the person that I am today. A college dropout with a favorite beer, Killian's Red, a phobia, bats, a fetish, girls named Heather, and an insatiable appetite for books.
There are a couple of, quote, foul-mouthed, bad-tempered halflings in the Goon Squad, which I quite like. They remind me of the two thieves who are halflings in the novel Grunts by Mary Gentle. But I checked the dates, and this scenario and the book came out basically at the same time. So either just a coincidence or something evil halfling related in the water at the time.
At one point in the module, the characters may, and indeed I think must, find Thespor reciting some lines from his play, or some play lines or something, I don't know. Anyway, we're meant to believe he's crazy. And I just like some of the lines, such as, "How now goes the raging nymph whose fires steam on a sea of ignorance?" And, "A duplicate's temperament fare now not well in this mission of rue."
Listeners, I'm just shaking my head in mute disappointment there. My final one is another member of the Goon Squad, actually. The Vindicator is the actual name of a half-elf assassin, is that right? Yeah.
The Vindicator, that's right.
The Vindicator, that's Vinticator, which strikes me as very much the kind of character and name for said character that a member of Tenacious D might come up with. Probably Jack Black, but it could be either of them.
Oh, please God, let's go to the Expert Delve.
Let's.
It's the Expert Delve. Tom, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about how to be your own personal OSR.
That's a great title. I like that. It sounds like a panel someone should do.
Yeah. Maybe at Gauntlet Con. But what I'm talking about there is taking something like this, which, maybe you just like the setting or the basic plot. I mean, let's be honest, an assassination during a theatre performance, that's a good hook, as we will revisit during Companion Adventures, and kind of trying to get something out of it. And I think there are two main ways to do that, and probably, Jason, you'll be able to advise us specifically how you might have done that in practice. But I'm thinking, firstly, just systematically-ish, going through, highlighting the good bits and turning it into useful prep notes for yourself, so that instead of multiple pages of triple-columned NPC information, you've just got a few notes that you can actually put into action during your game. Actually, I should just ask you now, is that what you did?
Well, so I should probably mention how I ended up using Legerdemain. I found myself being inspired by some of the NPCs, by this sort of, some of the basic, like, kind of goofiness going on in the module, and a few of the elements that are teased by the module but are never explored. In particular, the idea that the play might be a ritual. That's a theme I like sometimes. And so the author chose not to go down that route, but I did. And so what I did was I basically kind of recontextualize everything to be about a ritual taking place during the performance. And Skilter Rune was not the patron of the theater. He was, in fact, trapped in another plane of existence, and the ritual was meant to open a portal to allow him to re-enter the world. So pretty different.
Fairly different. Okay.
But I have to say, like, I can't disagree with what you just said, because I did something kind of similar, which is I was very focused on the big sort of like basic story beats, I guess, that, you know, for all of its faults, one thing that I think the module does do well is present a well-constructed little murder mystery thing, right? But it's not an actual murder mystery, right? Like, in any case, yeah, like, I think what you said there is really good. You can kind of go through a big wall of text like that and pick out, I always think for a single session, especially, like 5 to 7, like, big set pieces or key elements, and kind of like focus everything around those.
Yeah, that's good advice. So you want a manageable number of things to keep track of. One of the problems I noticed with the fixed action sequences as well is that, for example, it's great that you have, as I mentioned, chasing a cat during a fight scene, but you're already, like, fighting about 6 other people who all have special abilities and stuff. You're never going to keep track of it. Anyway, that aside, let's move on from there. The other thing I think is important about OSRing up a trad module like this is to move beyond the rigid sequence that you've got and make it into a fluid situation. But what I mean by that is a good OSR module is a snapshot of a situation that is about to be in motion. And what that means is you need to be not afraid of the consequences of anything that the players do amongst these competing factions. Each faction is one person in Legerdemain. You know, there's the wizard, there's the director, there's the theatre owner. They're all kind of got slightly different agendas going on. It's all a bit apocalypse world. And this scenario, like so many others of its era and type, its era and up to now, is terrified of the consequences of, like, running out of ideas. That's the thing here, is like, what if they do this? What if they figure out what's going on really early? Oh, well, then the game will be over. But no, it won't, because you've got a timetable. There's a play that has to be put on. More stuff will happen. And it's like that beginner-writer problem of, I'll save my good ideas for later because I won't have any more. But you will. You'll always have more ideas. And the players will always have more input. So you needn't worry about what happens if something goes quote-unquote wrong. You know, just figure that stuff out later. That's why Dungeon World uses fronts rather than sections that are definitely going to happen. And you can do that by just deciding not to obey the scenario when it says, if this happens, do this.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that in practice, the people who back in 1992 or whatever, who did run Legerdemain, I have to imagine in practice it probably went something like that, right? I hope, if the player characters did not, you know, if they just chose not to do any of the quote inevitable encounters, or chose not to follow the script, you know, I would hope that the DM would be able to, like, improv something right there on the spot, right?
Yeah.
But as written, that's not the way it goes, right?
No, and there's a lot of unnecessary spacing. Like, for example, if they don't have the inevitable nighttime encounter with, I've forgotten all the characters' names now.
Prim Glamour.
Well, then all that happens is you go forwards towards the opening day, and then everything goes down, and then they're slightly surprised that it's not him. But, I mean, you know, who cares?
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought up this idea of how static the module is, because that's something that really sticks out about it. It's a problematic thing about the module. I think it's what makes it, I think it's one of the main reasons why I've been snarking on it this whole time, right? It's these static sequences where if you intend to follow the module, you must make sure that the characters do X, Y, and Z in that order, right? Like they can't deviate from it because they're gonna miss things. But like you said earlier, I think missing certain aspects is probably not that big of a deal, right? But because at the end, it all just kind of boils down to that, to that fight during the play at the end anyhow. But whatever. If you're determined to unfurl the mystery and reveal the big plot twists of, it was an actual imp, or, the talisman is actually a cat, or, Skiltor is an MRA guy. I mean, like if your goal is to do all that, right, you have to follow these really set static things. Now, when I was looking at this and thinking like, how would I change, recontextualize, repurpose, alter, prepare for this module so I could run it in a way that was less railroady, this is kind of what I came up with. I don't know if this is like an OSR approach, but it's my approach, and I think it's in the same spirit. So I am a big fan of this, I don't know, proto-supplement that Grant Walmsley wrote for Cthulhu Dark called Dark Depths. I think it was just a experimental thing. I don't think he ended up doing anything with it, but I really love it. I actually think it's really, really good.
Graham's actually disavowed it to some degree now. He doesn't really recommend people use it, and I see why, because it's formulaic, but that's because it's a formula, and that's okay because it works. So
I love it. I don't know why he would disavow it. I think it's fantastic. I've written so many terrific Lovecraftian mysteries using it, but basically it's just like a questionnaire, right? You just like answer the questionnaire and you end up with a really cool little Lovecraftian mystery, because the questionnaire is set up in layers, basically, right? Layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. I think there's like 5. And within each layer, you have clues that you populate using the questions within each layer. These clues are paced out so that they match up with the classic Lovecraftian pacing, right? So in the beginning, you get newspaper reports, or, you get evidence of like some weird plant thing. But as it progresses, you start to learn about, the historical cults in the area, and you learn about dark totems and all that kind of thing. And you might find a grotesque book or something, and until you get all the way up to the end, which is where the cosmic horror is, right?
And I think what's great about it is that the clues are not like particular items or particular facts that you learn. They're always things like, newspaper reports in general, or signs that there's something here. It's not like you find this one, actually I was about to say one footprint that leads you to there, but of course that actually is a clue in the Secret Castronegro, which we agree is great. So that's a bad example, but it's not like a very particular breadcrumb of clues must lead you down a certain path. It's just that if you keep moving along and finding out more and more things, then you end up going deeper and deeper into the mystery and to different places until you find out what's going on or have the big final revelation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's actually something helpful there for Legerdemain, right? Legerdemain is not a Lovecraftian mystery, but like I said earlier, one of the things that the module does really well is it does show you like the sort of big picture narrative beats, right? The party is approached by the fussy owner of the theater, who talks for in a monologue for 7 paragraphs. The party, there's the day before the show where everyone's doing the work, on the production. There is the nighttime thing, spying on Prim Glamour. There is opening day. There's like a pace to it, right? Leading up to the big finale. And within each of those, the relevant clues are buried. I mean, truly, it has like a really like tidy sort of Murder, She Wrote feel to it, right? Except in this case, Jessica Fletcher only got the guy tangled up in the grid when she pushed him off, didn't actually kill him.
I get it.
So, but there's a solid bit of like mystery story pacing in the module, right? And you can take that as clues, right? So what I would do is I would divide the module up into some big subheadings and then just kind of list out the relevant clues. So my subheadings, for example, might be the day before the show, Prim Glamour's real intentions, opening night, the big finale. I think that's probably sufficient. And then within each of those, you just write the relevant pieces of information, but maybe decontextualized a little bit. Like you just have the basic information. Don't put too much detail about how they might discover it, because what you then do is let the party search whatever the fuck they want within the theater, investigate the circumstances around the theater. Maybe they don't even stay in the theater, right? But the point is they can go investigate in any way they want, and then you can just drop the clue wherever they're looking so that so that they get it when they need it, right? It's a very like gumshoe approach. It's a very Cthulhu Dark approach. The key thing here is your little like layers, right? Like day before the show, prim glamour, opening night, big finale. You can't move on to the next one until they have found X number of clues from the previous one, maybe like 2 or 3, right? That way you get that nice pace. So you maintain that pace, you maintain that structure, but the characters aren't on a railroad. They can find this stuff anywhere.
Yeah, because that sounds potentially a bit spoon-feedy, but I don't think it would be in Legerdemain because all the clues are kind of possessed by people. It's just things people know or saw. It's not like you have to, find one particular shoebox with an incriminating dual dagger in it, which then happens to show up wherever the PC is. Look, that's annoying. That's not OSR. That's real kind of, okay, you're definitely going to win no matter what, which is the most infuriating thing in this module, is that the bad guy cannot win as written. Actually, is that the most infuriating? No, it's just maybe top 5.
Definitely not, but yeah.
No. Yeah. Let's not oversell how infuriating that is in comparison to other things. But certainly there are some good, I was about to say realistic, it's never a word that should really apply here, but real feeling things, which is that the timetable is a real timetable within the story. There's a play that's on, dress rehearsals, opening night, day, that's it. And then, if you need to have them hit 2 or 3 things before moving on to the next stage of the timeline, that's still kind of okay and naturalistic because it's just meeting people at the theatre. This sort of closed little world of a few NPCs, like you say, like in Murder, She Wrote, or, Poirot, where everyone's always in one country house, or on a boat, or on a train, conveniently, no one could get in or out. And that means you can just have, if you just need to hit them with one more bit of info before moving on, just have, Tivity, the actress, show up, insult someone, mention something, and
act
move
like
on
a
with your
shrew
life.
because she's a woman.
Yeah, those women, eh? Anyway, so I think people-based mysteries like this are very good for having movable clues.
I think that's terrific. For me, I'm definitely presenting a more narrativist approach to this problem, right? Not your originally stated OSR approach for the segment. But I do think it is fair here because I do for this module in particular, because I think this module just wants to get to that fight at the end, right? Like ultimately, I think that's like kind of what it wants to get to.
Yeah, pretty much.
To me, like the rest of it's just set dressing. So, Tom, do we have anything else we want to say about this?
No, not really.
All right, then let's go to companion adventures. Hello, listeners. I want to take a second to tell you about the newest issue of Codex Moonlight. It features Pack of Strays, The Moonlit Road, an expansion for the Outcast werewolf game Pack of Strays, which was originally featured in Codex Beasts. Moon Language by Aura Bell, a one-player LARP about communicating with the moon through drawing. Under the Gaze of Ear, a supplement of moonlit mystery for Dungeon World. Apocalypse by Moonlight, a plugin for Powered by the Apocalypse games that help you build emergent mysteries. Our newest Gauntlet Daddy, Muscle Bear. 3 dozen truths revealed by the light of the moon. 9 original illustrations, including a fantastic new cover by Claudia Cangini, and a custom layout by Ollie Jeffrey. To get Codex Moonlight, just make a $4 or higher pledge on our Patreon by May 31st. That's patreon.com/gauntlet. Codex back issues are now available on DriveThruRPG. Thanks. It's the Companion Adventures. I'm going to start by recommending my YouTube actual play of my Dungeon World Legerdemain series. It's about 4 episodes, I think, which is about 900 times better than this module as written.
Well, you just damned yourself with faint praise. Okay, despite my cavilling about theatre-based episodes of TV shows, if you're going to watch one, I would say watch the episode in season 1 of Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, the one with the theatre murder. It's, where there's like a ghost or something, but surprise, surprise, it's not really a ghost at the end. Anyway, Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, Australian 1920s detective stuff. It's pretty good. And the episode in question is Season 1, Episode 6, Ruddy Gore.
I'm going to hold it down for America and suggest the theater murder episode of Murder, She Wrote. I don't know 100% for sure there is such an episode, but I bet if you Google it, one will come up.
I guarantee there's at least.
Yeah, there's
at least a few.
One. Yeah. My real next suggestion is also a TV thing. I'm going to say there's an episode of the new Doctor Who. I can't remember what season it is, but or which Doctor it is, but it's called the Shakespeare Code, and it's a good one. I remember liking it a lot. Basically, the Doctor and whoever the companion was at that time goes back to Shakespearean times, and some drama with Shakespeare takes place, but basically there are some witches and they're doing a ritual thing that they're trying to accomplish. The key thing here, why I think it's a great companion adventure, is because it also leads up to this big battle confrontation thing during the performance. It's pretty cool.
My film recommendation is The Man Who Knew Too Much. There are 2 versions of this film. There's a black and white one from the 30s and then a remake in the 50s in glorious Technicolor, both directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Of the 2, I slightly prefer the 56 one, which features Doris Day singing Que Sera Sera in a deliberately over-brassy manner to send a secret signal to her children upstairs. But the 34 version has Peter Lorre, so, either is fine. And the reason I recommend these are because they both feature a climactic assassination attempt during a performance at the Albert Hall in London, with the gunshot timed to go off just as the cymbals clash for the finale.
Book recommendations, since we've been talking a lot about like the OSR and old school gaming and kind of the historical paths that we have taken to get where we are today in the OSR. I'm going to suggest Matt Finch's A Quick Primer. Primer or primer?
I would say primer, but
A quick primer for old school gaming. It's pretty, the PDF's pretty inexpensive on Lulu, I think.
Cool. And I also have a book recommendation, which is Drachenfels, written by Jack Yeovil. It says on the cover that's actually a pseudonym for noted horror author and critic Kim Newman, he of the Anno Dracula series. And it's a Warhammer tie-in novel, which is surprisingly actually quite good and features a slightly labyrinthine plot, lots of flashbacks about a play being put on to recreate the slaying of a famous evil wizard, but it turns out that the adventurers who really killed that evil wizard, who are now involved in the production, maybe didn't really kill the wizard, and it's all anyway, it's pretty good, read it.
That name, Jack Yeovil, reminds me a little bit of the name of the imp, which we didn't mention in the module. The imp's name is Eavel.
Wow.
All right, then. Listeners, that's our show. We hope you enjoyed this. We are a production of The Gauntlet. You can find us on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. We are on G+. Just go to the community section of G+, and search for The Gauntlet. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. And hey, if you like this show, we would really love your support on Patreon. Your Patreon pledges make this thing happen. It's patreon.com/gauntlet. Tom, thanks so much.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, listeners. Take care.